Welcome everyone to Let's Talk It Over. And this is a program that Ken and I and oftentimes guests will join us to chat about things that we think, the public needs to know about. We also welcome all points of view because that's America. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, just drop us a line over in our Facebook page. Let's Talk It Over. Or you can even go to like Ken Wien's website and contact him there. So with that said, I think today, Ken, we decided to talk about something that is quite important because to me, it's our future, and that's education.
That sounds like a good topic, but before we do that, folks, I want to introduce our guest today. That's Henry the cat.
Say hi.
Hi, Henry.
He looks scared.
It's more likely to see his tail than his face, but
yeah, the tail always, that fluffy tail always shows up. But I've tried to put him outside. He scratches at the door. He's like Punky. He wants to be part of the show.
And as you all know, if you want to have some control over your pet's behavior, you get a dog.
Yes.
If you want to have control over your behavior, you get a cat.
Right. Because they're going to do what they want to do no matter what.
Absolutely. But, okay, so let's talk about education. I suppose we could start with litter box training. In a way, it really is a good place to start in education. It's very much easier to litter box a cat than it is a dog. Even though dogs are much more willing to try and do what you want them to do, that's not something they learn easily. And that brings up the first thing about education. Okay? There is a difference between education based on natural development and education that is based on political agenda. Mm-hmm. And just to start with, one of the things that we know, and the reason we know it is because there is a country that exemplifies it, that if you do education based on natural proclivities, inclinations, instincts, things like that, you get better results.
Yes.
And that nation is Finland. But in general, in the Scandinavian countries, the approach to education is much more naturally driven. Now, to some degree, there are more instinctually driven educational methods and some less. For example, in this country and in much of the world, there are a lot of Montessori schools or Montessori-like schools in which there's a heavy emphasis in the early years on play as learning, on doing as learning. And that, again, that seems to produce better results. I know this is kind of going off the topic a little bit, but the other day I saw that children who are as young kids brought up with a dog in the house. Sorry, Henry, it didn't say anything about cats. They were less likely to develop Crohn's disease and similar digestion problems. Oh. Now, yeah, and if you think about it, it probably has more to do with the natural learning of relationship that goes on, and the soothing and the mirroring that goes on. I mean, there are a lot of things we don't know. We have to learn about. Then there's the goal of political education. Political education really is the underpinning of most formal educational systems, but particularly in the early British system that then was mirrored in this country, and then that was then became the public school system in this country, which is, of course, a very, very different thing. And that the people who were doing that were really concerned with how people fit into the body politic. So a lot of the early education in this country and in England at the same time was about law, and a law based on theology. And it was, you learned Latin, Greek, theology.
Yes.
Right? And the idea was that you were educating leaders. Of course, people were coming into this, for the most part, even the ones who were being tutored at home when they were young, they were coming into this like later on. But the idea was that they were going to be the orators, the speakers, the idea expressors. This was a model that went back to before the Reformation in a way, and it started with the idea that you needed the priest to interpret the scripture. And then, of course, when you get to the Reformation, particularly in England, then, of course, we need the pastor to be well read. We need them to be able to interpret, and particularly to interpret scripture. So we have in this country, places like Harvard University and Princeton, my alma mater, Yale, all those old schools, that really were educating primarily people to discuss ideas, like me. That's the tradition that I grew into.
Yes.
But I didn't start out that way. I started out in what was a typical public school at the time. And if you think about it, one of the things when I was a kid, which I would guess that most people now, because I'm pretty old, don't remember this, but our desks were fixed and in rows. You move them around, let alone be sitting at a table. And the idea was that it was very similar to what a factory was like.
Yeah.
And it was, everybody was supposed to be very much the same, because that was the society that we were being fitted into. And there were certain things that went along, I'm talking about now in kindergarten, having a biblical passage read over the loudspeaker every day. And by the way, that biblical passage was more often than not New Testament, although I'm from a Jewish background, and obviously had nothing to do with the fact of whether or not I was an atheist.
My teacher would read both, Ken.
Your teacher would read both?
He would read it in Hebrew.
Okay, but
he would read first the Christian, then the Hebrew.
But how often did he read anything from the Hindu scriptures or the Quran?
Ever. Yeah. We didn't even learn about those. We had to do that on our own as we got older.
Right.
It became more inquisitive.
Yeah. And then, of course, we'd all pledge allegiance to the United States, to the flag. And by the way, it was very interesting because at a certain point, not at the beginning, when I was little, but at the point, they changed the pledge to include God.
Yeah, it didn't used to be there.
Right. So we were being...
Just like our money, it didn't used to be there,
We were indoctrinated. Now, I'm old enough rather, to remember that although I didn't go to school till after the end of the war, I was being indoctrinated to save money, to buy bonds, government bonds, things like that.
Yeah, bonds were a big deal back then.
Yeah. And there were all these things you were being indoctrinated to. And then, people started to raise issues about it. First of all, people raised questions about the format, okay? And they started to have movable desks, and then they had tables. and you had work areas. And nowadays they have different work areas as well. So you can have an art area and a computer area and what in the room, and the students can go around the different areas. Now, some of it was because there wasn't the technology, but a lot of it had to do with we were being prepared to live in the world that our teachers had been living in. And that's always going to be a problem, right, folks? I've said before on the show, and Monica, I know we've talked about this, that if you want something done with your computer, the best shot is to get an 11, 12-year-old to do it. After that, they're too old.
Yeah, you're right.
But, the world is changing so quickly. And one of the things is that a lot of teachers, of course, are not changing with. So that's a problem we have. I mean, I'm usually pro-teacher, but I want to point out a lot of times teachers don't keep up. So the school system, what does it exist for exactly? To some degree, it's a babysitting service. One of the reasons we have schools was that we had people going to work. And if you needed time to work, especially if to survive, everybody had to be working, that getting the kid off the street into the school was a babysitting service, and a good one. At some point, it included nutrition. They started giving school lunches. That's right after the Second World War, actually. It also became a distributor of health. I remember getting hearing exams, eyesight exams, a TB test, and I don't remember if I got any of my inoculations in school because I had a regular pediatrician. So
I think you had to have them before you could come to school.
To have them to go to school.
Yeah.
But they did offer them in school. I mean, if you didn't have your shots, of course there were fewer shots back then. But I remember when the polio shots came out, and they were being given in the schools. And then of course they went to the oral polio, which of course kids liked a lot better.
Yeah, I still have a scar.
But again, I'm saying is that the educational system in this country has been for a lot of purposes. Now, in the country now, it's getting to a question of what are the purposes. One of the biggest dividing points became after Brown versus Board of Education and the change into the desegregation. And people really, one of the things that schools did, and not just in the South, everywhere, schools really pushed segregation. Now, it was easier then, too, in a way, because there were far fewer, back when I was a kid, there were far fewer Asians in this country, and the Asians were much more segregated and ghettoized. But there were also fewer Hispanics, except here in like Texas, Arizona, where I live, New Mexico. But I mean, if you went up to Boston, where I was, people were more segregated. There were also more segregated housing-wise. And the blacks who did live in the greater Boston area, I think I've said before on the show, I remember having one black classmate in junior high, and that was a regular city junior high school, and that was one. I don't remember any in my elementary school. And yet, all of a sudden, segregation was wrong. People started talking about busing, and not just in the South, but integrating schools. And there are a lot of people who didn't want that. A lot of people who felt that was an attack on them personally. Primarily, obviously.
But that is sad.
I'm sorry, it's what?
That's sad. that people would think it was an attack on them.
Well, I agree and I disagree. The agree part is that we should all be one, and I'm a great believer in diversity and equality. But the true part of it is that if you have in your school system a white school where the state is paying, say, $5,000 a year toward the education of kids, and you have a black school where the state is paying $1,000 a year, and then you take and make it one school, then clearly if you are a white family, your kid's getting a little bit less spent. And that was a big part of it. You have to understand that was a big part of it. That in order to put those kids on that bus, and they had to, primarily, it had to be black kids being bused because the black schools were so bad.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, well, we can just switch the kids around.
Right. It wasn't that easy.
But, you're spending a lot of money, taking a lot of money away from, and there was a lot of resistance, not just in the South. There was resistance everywhere to this. So again, my point is education is not just about the nature of people, helping people grow. It's also about politicizing us. And it's inherent in, and therein lies the whole thing, okay? It is inherent in education. As soon as you get to talking about ideas, as soon as you get to talking about patriotism, as soon as you talk about religion, as soon as you talk about anything, all of a sudden, you're indoctrinating. Okay? Once that kid stops wandering around, like in Finland, wandering around kind of indoor, outdoor, asking questions, climbing trees, looking at the animals, etc., and they start actually learning to read, guess what? What they read, what they look at, is going to affect them. I have a very good friend who is from South Sudan, and he has a memoir which I helped him with. I co-authored with him. Mm-hmm. It's coming out from All Things That Matter Press, and one of the things in it is when he starts going to school, and he is in these refugee-driven, schools. They're training him to be, among other things, a boy soldier. But so they're learning to sing these songs and things. But then there's this wonderful thing that has nothing to do with that part of the indoctrination, where he's reading this book. He's learning to read English. Mm-hmm. And it's the story of a family in Kenya. Okay, it's a book about a black family, a Kenyan family, and he's, it's a primer, reading primer. And the kid in this book has a bicycle. And it became one of Deng's goals in life to get a bicycle like that.
Yeah.
This is his indoctrination to materialism. And in fact, when he comes to the United States, I don't want to give too much about the book away, but when he gets to the United States and he's in high school and he gets a job, at a grocery store, bagging, getting carts, that kind of. And what does he do with the first money he makes? He goes out and buys himself a bicycle.
Yes.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily think of it. So, when I was a kid, we started out, I was already reading, but, we were starting out with books about Dick and Jane going up a hill.
Yeah, I remember those.
And, it was very interesting. But I was growing up at a time when people many of them had to fetch water. I lived in a city, so we had running water on it. But my brother, who's a little older than I, does remember them bringing ice up to the house.
Yeah.
I don't. I remember having a nice house in Maine, but not in the house in Massachusetts. But why would you have a kid today learning about fetching pails of water?
Yeah.
It wouldn't make sense. So we're constantly revising the books. We're constantly revising what education is.
Because it changes with the technology we have and the knowledge that we have gained. And actually, by finding more truth in history, giving people a voice who didn't have one before.
Well, not just history, technology. I mean, when I was a kid, I was forced to take woodworking, basic electrical work, blueprint drawing, printing, and metalwork. Now, I am totally incompetent with my hands, folks. The only thing I use them for is like keyboarding and gesturing.
Yeah, you can write using them.
No. Oh, goodness, no. I can type.
Right.
Yeah, I cannot write. At least not so anybody can read it.
Well, cursive is dead now anyway, so.
And that's by the way, that's a very interesting thing. You know, we have people today who are saying we should bring back cursive. Now, I happen to like calligraphy. I think it's very pretty.
I love writing cursive. I just love it.
Yeah, well, you're a good painter and drawer and pastel. I'm not sure. What do you call somebody who does pastels?
Pastel artist.
Artist. Okay. I thought it might be.
No, it's nothing fancy.
But you know, I don't use my hands for much because I'm really uncoordinated. The only thing that my brain connects to is my mouth. but so they
better education for you would have been you not taking many of those classes and going into areas that you excel at.
Sure, yeah, but the schools, you know, in those days, because the idea was we needed people who could set type. I mean, who the hell sets type anymore? I mean, it's an artisan form. There are a few people who can still use a California job case. There are a few people. Now, my brother, who loves that kind of stuff, and it got two people's worth of coordination. He's also intellectually bright too, but he's really coordinated. And he loves using metal to make sculpture and stuff like that.
Yes.
God love him. So anyway, but the idea then was to prepare people to go out into the world of work. Now,
but was it really? Because there were things I wanted to do that they wouldn't even allow me to discuss with future employers.
Well, partly because, of course, if you were a woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the only reason. We were given nursing, secretary, you know, waitress, that type of thing. And even though you wanted to be a journalist or whatever, they wouldn't even talk to you, the colleges and recruiters.
And if you wanted to take woodworking instead of home economics, they'd send you to the guidance counselor if they had.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to, which I like that much more than home ec. I already learned home ec at home. Yeah. I didn't need it.
And that's a very funny part of it too, although I didn't learn woodworking at home. You know, it would have made much more sense for me to learn home ec at school because no mother in those days would teach their son how to sew.
I know.
Or
how to cook or anything. Yeah.
The only thing I learned how to do was run a vacuum cleaner. I learned to wash dishes. That was before dishwashers. And
yes. We learned that when we were young, I think.
So I guess what you and I are both saying is that education has always been in form of indoctrination. So what should schools be teaching now and how becomes a very interesting thing. And it's fascinating. I wanted to get off onto something I just read today because it was fascinating to me. There was a school in Wisconsin, and they sent their Black student union on a field trip, bus trip, down to Louisiana, which is a hell of a long bus trip, and to go visit Black colleges, historically Black colleges, and other places of interest in Black history, which is really kind of an interesting thing because, you know, this gets us into the whole, you know, teaching of race and teaching, you know, critical race theory and how it influences. And this is, I think, something where most people would say, well, that's positive. You know, kids who are interested in Black history and Black being sent on this trip.
Yeah, because there are maybe 2 Black historians that we would even learn about.
Yeah. So this group goes down, and it's not just a Black group, by the way. There are some white kids. There's, and of course, there are chaperones. And some of the chaperones are white. And so they go down in this bus, and before they get on the bus, the school says, we want to open everybody's baggage, look at it, make sure nobody's bringing any contraband. And this group of kids, from the sound of it, they're really good kids, you know. These kids are interested in colleges. These kids, you know,
yes.
I mean, hey, look, they're teenagers. I'm sure they get into their share of mischief, but these are basically real good kids. And the kids say, fine, you can look in our bags. So they do. They get on the bus. They go down. They have this trip. On this bus, they drive all the way to down south. They go to all of these events. There is not a single instance of a disciplinary problem. Not a single incident.
Yeah. And that's strange with that many children.
Just understand that, you know. Then they're driving back and they make a pit stop. And the pit stop is at a public McDonald's. Okay, it's not, you know, just these kids. There's a whole group. And one of the chaperones smells marijuana in the McDonald's. Does not see a single one of the kids smoking anything. Okay. Does not see, you know, they're doing nothing. Anybody,
right.
Got to make that clear. They get out to the bus, and one of the white chaperones decides that he wants to search the bags and pockets of the Black boys.
Just the Black.
Just the Black and just the boys. Because somebody was smoking marijuana. Oh, but he's getting sued.
Well, he should be. That's not right.
Okay, but the thing is that one of the kids challenged him, evidently, and said to him, if this were the Skeet Club, which is mostly white and does a lot of trips, and the same thing happened where you happen to smell marijuana in a McDonald's, would you search them? And this idiot says no. I mean, he's being honest at least, but
wow.
Now I'm sure the school will settle. You know, I mean, and how much damage was done? It probably will be some kind of disciplinary action against the chaperone, and there will probably be some kind of token payment because it's a lawsuit, and then there will probably be some kind of change in policy, as there should be. But the thing that is striking here is that we have people in this country now who are arguing we shouldn't be teaching about sexual diversity. We shouldn't be teaching about history of racism. We shouldn't be.
They want it to disappear.
And it lives on. That's an example of racism, structural racism in our society.
And it's gotten worse from what I have seen over the last few years.
I don't know if it's gotten worse or we've just gotten more aware of.
That could be.
I think it's more that we're aware of. One of the things that mass media does, social media, is it makes it available to us to see. And those of us who care about it are more, like this was an obscure thing. But I think that more and more of us have got to be speaking out that education is about the society, not that we had. I grew up being prepared for the society that my father, who was a teacher, had grown up in. I want my grandkids and their kids to grow up being prepared for a society that's more to the future, the society in which change is going on. In order to do that, we have to open ourselves to the idea that education is supposed to lead, not follow.
And unfortunately, politics is inside education right now so fiercely. They're opening up little side schools to teach their views.
I don't have a problem. I mean, I do, but I don't, because I do believe in diversity and I do believe in the right to bring up your kids. I have no problem with, well, when I was a kid, twice a week on Sundays, so 3 times a week, I'd go to, or I was supposed to go to, Hebrew school. And it was supposed to teach me how to be a better Jew. I have to tell you, I didn't go a lot. I was much more interested in the English part where we discussed history and ideas. Learning Hebrew language did not excite me at all. When I got into high school and I got to study French, I enjoyed that, but Latin and Hebrew never really turned me on.
Sorry, I got the cat. It's leaning on it.
But it was indoctrination. I have no problem. If you believe that your pure Reconstructionist Christianity is right, and you want to have your kid go to school a couple hours after school each week to help indoctrinate them, you have that right. I think you should have that right. I don't have a problem. But when you want the public school doing that, or when you object to the public school talking about the greater society, then I have a problem.
My answer to these parents, they have choices. Might not like the choices, but if they don't like what public school is offering, they have every right to homeschool their children. They always have.
Yeah, well, actually, no, they haven't always.
Well, I mean, quite a long time.
For a while now. That goes back really basically to the Brown versus Board of Education.
But they should not be allowed to force their personal opinion on education, on the schools.
I disagree with you. I do not think that parents should be allowed to homeschool and not teach any of the new ideas. I believe, yes, you have the right to educate your children privately that way. And in fact, we have had people on the show who have done that. And I don't disagree with that right, but I do disagree with the right to do it only pushing what your agenda is, because I think your children have a right to the opportunity of a future. I disagree with, for example, in Pennsylvania, where the Amish are allowed to take their kids out of school at 8th grade. I think that the kid should have a right to continue. I think that the kid should be exposed to the full curriculum. And more, I think that kind of, hey, fine, as long as the kid is learning about the world, homeschooling is fine with me. But if they're only learning like a little narrow notion That's not okay, because, they're not just your kids. They're my kids, too. They're my kids.
I know, but you're not going to get some parents to ever agree with that because they feel like it's up to them to educate their children the way they feel best.
And
whether it's right or wrong.
That, I don't have to agree with them. And I think my political stance is, that no, we have a right as a society to make sure that all of our children are fully educated. That you can teach them your values and your religious view, I personally have no problem with. But that they should have access to the full range of what education is. By the same token, I think that public schools should be teaching religious history. I don't think they should be reading pieces of the Bible at random to kids over the loudspeaker, but I do think that courses in religion and how it has influenced the nation and what the religions of the world are, and I think things like that.
I totally believe that also, because I know that we had humanities and we looked a little bit into other religions and the way society works, but I had to go out on my own and actually study each religion.
Well, I'm more talking to the right of the Christians, who are, the most vocal about this in this country, that yes, I can accept the idea that there should be some education in Christianity.
Yes.
I would like it balanced, though, and I know they would disagree, that there should also be education about Judaism, Hinduism.
I think so too.
Yeah, all these other religions. And I think that
if we're educating people, we need to educate them about the reality within the world. We didn't have the internet or the ability to communicate with people from other countries to even find out what they were truly about until recently. It's a different world now. Whether the people want to keep it the old way or not, it's not going to happen.
It's quite true.
It's gone past that.
Absolutely. The other thing is, I would like schools, and again, this is part of why I don't want people just homeschooling, because I want people to be educated about the use of buzzwords. I see discussions about socialism, communism, that make absolutely no sense if you know.
Yeah, no, you're right. They use these things,
but it's the wrong way. Life. Life is not a single word. It's only one thing. It depends on context. Education is helping people to understand those things. So, anyway.
And the truth is, not all, but many students who do follow whatever the school's teaching or their parents are teaching, when they become an adult and go out on their own and actually mingle with other people, their minds are going to open up to these other ideas and realities within the world. No matter what mom and dad wanted to keep them in that little bubble, they're going to meet different people and they're going to get new ideas. So
absolutely. Okay, we're about out of time, Monica.
Yes, we could go on forever.
I have something that I'd like to add to the end of today's show, and I'm going to ask Monica to put this YouTube up. It's a speech that was given by a woman in Michigan, I believe. She is a member of the state Senate there, if I recall correctly. And one of the members of the Senate from the opposing party basically said that she was trying to groom children for sexual.
Well, and that's all the Putin way. That's how he works. He, just attacks people with ridiculous charges.
Anyway, this woman, she wrote, said some really provocative things about this other woman. And the woman replied, and I really thought it an incredible statement. In fact, I'm just on the I've never heard of this woman. I mean, she's a state senator in another state. I mean, I've never heard of her. Just on the basis of listening to her speech, I have a feeling we're going to see her on the national stage.
I hope so.
This is one of those, and I'd like to have you folks please listen in and catch this speech, because it's really a beautiful, articulate speech by a very decent woman who happens, among other things, to be straight, white, Christian, married with and a mother. So, she ticks all those boxes of the tradition, and the speech is just remarkable.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it. Okay, well, we're going to make sure to have that up right now. And Ken, thank you so much for talking with me today about this very important topic. And again, if anyone would like to come on with us, if they have opposing views, or if they agree with us, or they're in the middle, just drop us a line and join us, because that's what we're about. Let's talk it over. Here you go, folks. Enjoy this. See you next time. Bye, Ken.
Bye.
Ephraim, my neighbor, wasn't much of a musician, but he could pick at a guitar and his voice didn't stray too far off track. That made him good enough for a part-time gig at the Drop Inne. That's where he and I hung out. There must be one of those pun name bars in every town. Some have the extra E to make them sound classy, and some don't. Other than that, they're all pretty much the same. Dumps. This one, it belonged to Sal Marjoni. Had an Irish theme courtesy of some 4-leaf clover decals and a sign for Killian's Red, which Sal didn't actually serve. He did make a bad Irish coffee using a tar-like liquid from a seldom cleaned and long overboiled pot topped with Ready Whip. Order a copy of Tales from the Drop Inne, and as Sal would say, enjoy yourself.